In recent years, we've seen the MMA world grow more and more. We've had amazing fighters like McGregor,
getting loose, getting better here in this round though.
Oh man.
Until that.
Oh, he's done.
Diaz, and Overeem step into the octagon.
Break free.
He's gonna tap. He's gonna tap.
It's all over. It is all over. Nate Diaz.
But did you know a few famous boxers tried their luck in this sport as well? Sadly, these famous boxers were unsuccessful. Our first unsuccessful superstar is James Toney.
He's got to be busier. That left hand landed.
Unorthodox guy.
He's probably one of the most infamous examples of a boxer entering the world of MMA. Toney is widely recognized as one of the best boxers of his generation. He won 3 world titles in different weight divisions, and with a nearly 3-decade career, it's no wonder he racked up so many titles. He won the IBF middleweight title, the IBF super middleweight title, and the IBF cruiserweight title. In both 1991 and 2003, he was voted Fighter of the Year by the renowned Ring magazine. And in 2005, he even won the WBA heavyweight title, although the decision was turned over as he tested positive for steroids. Sadly, by 2010, Toney was well past his prime, so he decided to switch sports. Here we saw him step into the MMA world, and surprisingly enough, the UFC set him up with a big money deal and matched him against the legendary fighter, former UFC heavyweight champion, Randy Couture. Now remember, this was Toney's debut fight, and yes, his cockiness didn't help him at all. He talked a big game, saying that no one in the UFC, not even Couture, would be able to deal with his speed and punching power.
Let's have Toney! Ready! The natural part 2!
However, in the octagon, it was an entirely different story, and almost no high-speed punches were thrown from Toney. Couture didn't bother standing and fighting with Toney. He brought him down the first moment he could. He used a simple ankle pick, and just after 3 minutes, he slapped on an arm triangle choke. Toney was so shocked and panicked that he didn't even tap out correctly.
Randy on top in the mount, pounding on James Toney. James just showed no ability or knowledge about this position.
Instead, he flailed his arms about while he was in submission. A few weeks later, Toney was released from his UFC deal and went back to boxing. He was one of the biggest names that were taught how different the two sports are. So, did you know that Muhammad Ali also tested the waters of MMA? Or well, sort of. Cassius Clay, better known as Muhammad Ali, is still considered by many to be the greatest and most legendary boxer ever. Now, he was boxing way before MMA and the UFC were conceived. However, one could argue that he competed in one of the earliest forms of MMA. Way back in June 1976, Ali faced off against Antonio Inoki. Now, Muhammad Hussein Inoki was a Japanese pro wrestler, and the two were facing off in a mixed rule fight. The fight was labeled as the War of the Worlds. At that time, Ali was the reigning WBC and WBA heavyweight champ, and he was coming off of a knockout victory over challenger Richard Dunn.
The champion has plenty himself, there's no question about that. Rolling down from that right hand. I don't know if he's gonna make.
This happened just a month before he went to Japan. The fight took place under a very special set of rules. The demand and negotiations between the two camps of the fighters drastically modified what was and wasn't allowed in the fight. And eventually, it was decided that Inoki could not throw or tackle Ali to the ground, and he could only use kicks when one of his knees was on the mat.
そんなアリの強烈なパンチを受けながらも猪木は
Now, these rules might sound as if they were in Ali's favor, but the fight didn't exactly play out entirely in his favor. Ali was restricted to only landing 2 jabs, and Inoki used a series of kicks. He mainly stayed in the crab position on the ground and landed leg kicks to break down Ali's legs. Surprisingly, the fight went the distance, and 15 rounds later, the fight was declared a draw. The fight at the time wasn't well received by the crowd or audiences watching from home. However, reportedly, the fight was the inspiration for the formation of the Pancrase promotion, one of the world's first real MMA organizations. The next fighter was one of the most popular men in boxing in the early 2000s. Ricardo Mayorga is a Nicaraguan native, and in the 2000s, he was known as one of the sport's craziest fighters.
Come on, Mayorga inviting Cotto in. Come on, fight me. Keep
In his prime, he won the WBA and WBC welterweight titles, as well as the WBC super welterweight title. He went toe-to-toe against fighters like Vernon Forrest, Felix Trinidad, Oscar De La Hoya, and Shane Mosley. But after a loss to Miguel Cotto, he stepped away from the boxing ring. However, he didn't retire. Instead, El Loco stepped into the octagon. In May 2013, Mayorga made his MMA debut on the regional circuit, and he was originally declared the winner of his debut match when his opponent Wesley Tiffer was unable to answer the bell for the third round. However, his victory was short-lived when the decision was overturned to a no contest. It was decided that Mayorga injured his opponent with a foul move, a knee to the spine. This showed fans his lack of understanding of the sport. El Loco had 3 more fights all in the regional circuit, but all 3 ended in failure, with 2 of them ending in submission. This put El Loco out for good.
Logra aplicarle una guillotina peligrosísima al matador, muy atento el referee del fallo.
And he moved back to boxing in 2014, making him another fighter who didn't come close to the big time of the UFC. Our next fighter also had a tough time in the MMA world. However, he won 1 of his 2 fights. Ray Mercer is a former WBO heavyweight champ and Olympic gold medalist.
Hold up. Good jab, right?
He can't stop there and gets, because as long as he's moving, taking little steps and letting his hands.
And yes, he did win one of his 2 MMA fights. But the win's weird nature and the fact that Merciless never set foot inside a cage again qualifies him for this list. He went against massive names back in the day. Tommy Morrison, Evander Holyfield, and Lennox Lewis are just a few of the names he went against. But when he lost his fight against Vladimir Klitschko in 2003, he decided it was time for a change.
There comes a point. Another huge run. He's just teeing up on him now.
Yeah, I mean, Randy Newman's got to look at stepping in here.
And he has done.
Initially, he went into kickboxing, but that didn't really work out for him. So he went to the MMA and tried to make a career for himself over there. His first fight was against street fighting legend Kimbo Slice. But after a minute of fighting, he couldn't use his boxing skills at all. He was then guillotine choked and tapped out. But 2 years later, he returned.
Said it would be Kimbo on the back with Ray Mercer in his guard. Mercer tapping out. Guillotine choke.
This time, however, he went up against former UFC heavyweight champ Tim Sylvia. And after a lot, and we mean a lot of negotiation, it was set that the fight would take place with full MMA rules. Sylvia didn't come into the fight with a serious demeanor, especially since he tipped the scales at well over 300 pounds. This was a grave error on his part. Mercer caught Maniac with a sledgehammer right hand after just 9 seconds. This sent him to the floor and knocked him out silly. Here, Mercer ended his MMA career as he claimed that other MMA heavyweights were too scared to fight him, even though Slice made him tap out. And even though he signed with the King of the Cage promotion in 2010, he actually never fought for them. So these were only a few of the boxers who didn't make it into the MMA world, and we're sure there'll be more in the future. But if you're a massive MMA fan, or just a guy who likes to do crab kicks, remember to subscribe, and we'll see you next time in another